They were coming, armed men with cruel intentions, believing they were about to intimidate a simple ranching couple into submission. But they had no idea who they were dealing with, because this wasn't just any couple. The wife had spent her life in the shadows of war zones, a former Delta Force operative, trained to dismantle entire operations with precision and brutality. She was a ghost on the battlefield, feared by enemies who never saw her coming. And her husband, a former CIA agent, a strategist with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and sniper skills honed to deadly perfection. Before we dive into the storm that's about to unfold, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. If you love tales of tactical brilliance, lethal confrontations, and unstoppable heroes, don't forget to subscribe for more. Now let's get started. Morgan Steele stood at the edge of her property, gazing out at the wide expanse of dusty plains, stretching all the way to the Mexican border. The ranch she owned and tended with her husband, Michael Carter, was anything but modest. It was a vast piece of land flanked by rolling hills, prickly desert shrubs, and sun-baked roads that meandered through the arid terrain. The nearest neighbor was miles away, which suited Morgan just fine. After a career in Delta Force, she had no desire for crowds or city life. She craved solitude, the kind she believed she'd find here in the borderlands. Michael, formerly with the CIA, felt much the same. Their days started at dawn, with Morgan checking the livestock and Michael maintaining the perimeter security. Work that was as physically demanding as it was psychologically reassuring. There was a tranquil rhythm to these chores, an unhurried pace that reminded them they'd left their dangerous pasts behind. But even with the peace they found in the open skies and hush of the land, they'd taken precaution. Along the fence lines, they'd hidden motion sensors that could detect intruders. High-resolution night vision cameras punctuated key points around the property. In a secure room inside a renovated barn, they kept a small arsenal of weapons locked away, careful measures born from a lifetime of experience in the shadowy corners of the world. Yet for all their preparation, Morgan had a nagging feeling that something far larger than them was looming on the horizon. In recent weeks, that uneasy suspicion had grown into a constant awareness. At first, it was little more than a passing glimpse, a black SUV creeping along the dirt road adjacent to their ranch, idling as though surveying the area before driving off. Morgan dismissed it as perhaps curious tourists or misguided travelers. But then it happened again and again. She began noticing footprints in the dust near the southern fence line, footprints that led from nowhere in particular, and vanished just as mysteriously. Nighttime camera footage occasionally showed blurred silhouettes slipping in and out of frame, carrying what appeared to be rifles. Early one morning, the sound of revving engines interrupted Morgan's routine as she was checking on the horses. Their leader, a man with a rigid bearing and an unsettlingly calm demeanor, introduced himself as Mateo Ruiz. She saw the way his companions flanked him, the subtle bulge of firearms beneath their jackets, the steely confidence in the man's smile as though he considered himself untouchable. Mateo took off his sunglasses and surveyed them with an air of ownership. He then turned to Morgan, addressing her as Senora Steele, a courtesy that sounded more like a threat before explaining, with a velvet smoothness, that he was very impressed by Rancho del Cielo and intended to purchase it. Morgan felt the weight of his word. His tone carried the implicit message, "You will sell or you will regret it." To underscore his seriousness, one of his men popped open a sleek black briefcase, revealing neat stacks of cash, $2 million, an enormous sum for a piece of land in the desert. Even if it was spacious, Morgan's hand inched toward the concealed sidearm at her waist. She refused to show fear, meeting Mateo's gaze firmly. "This ranch isn't for sale," she said, voice steady. His false smile fell away. Drawing closer, he dropped the pretense of politeness and pointed out what happened to neighbors who disagreed with him. Some had vanished entirely, he said with a shrug that implied it could happen to her just as easily. Morgan held her ground, stepping forward to pluck the business card he extended. Her eyes remained locked on his, letting him see the resolve burning there. When Mateo and his entourage finally sped off, leaving a cloud of desert dust in their wake, Morgan knew the lines had been drawn. She found Michael already checking the perimeter cameras. Yet Morgan stood by the threshold of their home, scanning the horizon, as though searching for an enemy she could already sense. "They won't stop. Even if we do," she replied. Their ranch was only one piece of the puzzle. If they walked away, the region would fall entirely under Los Asesinos del Desierto's dominion. They would use the property to funnel contraband, drugs, weapons, people, straight through the border. Morgan refused to yield such a strategic vantage point to criminals. The question lingered. How could two individuals, even if they were highly trained, stand against a well-funded cartel as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in burnt orange and crimson? Morgan stood on the porch, her arms crossed over her chest. She surveyed the property that she and Michael had poured their hearts into. The rolling plains seemed peaceful, but she couldn't shake the sense that malevolence was lurking just beyond the fence line. She recalled Mateo's warning, the cold gleam in his eyes, and the unwavering threat in his voice. If there was one thing Morgan knew how to do, it was preparing for battle. Decades in special operations had taught her not only how to fight, but how to wage a psychological war. She understood that Los Asesinos del Desierto relied on fear, intimidation, and brutality. However, Morgan was no stranger to fear. She had been shaped by it, had learned to harness it as a weapon. Now, with her husband standing beside her, she prepared for what she sensed would be the biggest test of their resolve. Night descended, bringing a sharp chill and a canopy of stars overhead. Morgan insisted that both she and Michael sleep in the darkness. The camera's infrared beams scanned the desert. Now and then, a coyote's howl reverberated through the still air, a forlorn cry that underscored just how isolated they were. Yet Morgan felt no desire to run. The land had become her sanctuary, a symbol of independence. She wouldn't surrender it without a fight. Shortly before dawn, she woke from a light doze, scanning the monitors once more. Everything was quiet, but she wondered how long that would last. Her mind replayed Mateo's arrogance, the way he dismissed her refusal with a thinly veiled threat. She also remembered the rumors swirling through Nuevo Laredo, that the local farms had been coerced into selling, that certain farmers had vanished without explanation. That terror now lurked behind every polite exchange in the dusty street. Morgan had faced warlords and insurgents abroad, but seeing such oppression so close to home filled her with righteous anger. As the first rays of sunlight stretched across the horizon, she stepped outside. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush. She could see the shimmering heat in the distance, promising yet another scorching day. Inside her chest, determination burned hotter than any desert sun. Returning to the house, she found Michael at the table, examining satellite images on his laptop, a courtesy provided by David Hawkins' intelligence network. "There's definitely a pattern," Michael remarked, pointing at highlighted plots of land. "Nearly every large property near the border has changed ownership in the past 6 months, all suspiciously below market price. People are either being forced out or paid off." Morgan nodded, her lips pressed tight. It was worse than she'd imagined. This wasn't just an isolated attempt to seize their ranch. It was a systematic takeover. They would soon discover if their preparations were enough. By Morgan's estimation, Los Asesinos del Desierto wouldn't wait long. The fact that Mateo had personally come to threaten them meant he considered Rancho del Cielo essential for his operation. Was it because of its vantage point, with open land stretching for miles in every direction? Or was there a hidden route through the ranch that smugglers used to cross into the U.S.? Morgan intended to find out and to foil whatever scheme they had in mind. In a final flurry of readiness, Morgan walked the perimeter, verifying that all sensors were active. She updated the camera system's firmware to ensure clarity in the recordings. Then she checked the barn, running a hand over the racks of rifles, ensuring each was clean, loaded, and ready. In the corner, she noticed a battered punching bag. For a moment, she considered taking out her frustration on it, letting the flurry of punches clear her mind. But she decided to save her energy. After all, if Los Asesinos del Desierto came, she'd need every ounce of strength and discipline she had. When the day gave way to another sunset, Morgan and Michael sat down for a quick meal. They spoke in hushed tones about possible reinforcement. "Could they call the local authorities?" Michael had asked. "No," Morgan answered. "The local authorities were likely compromised, bought off, coerced, or simply outgunned by a cartel of this caliber. Their best bet was to rely on the limited but trustworthy circle of allies they still had. David Hawkins had promised to pass along any new intelligence. Docker, Herrera might keep them informed of suspicious injuries that cropped up. Isabella Martinez was presumably working on the Mexican side of the border, investigating infiltration by Los Asesinos del Desierto. Still, the resources at Morgan's disposal were meager compared to an international smuggling ring. She exhaled. collecting her resolve. She had faced impossible odds before. If war was coming, she would fight it on her terms. In that solemn moment, Morgan felt a subtle shift in the air, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. She visualized the swirling dust of an approaching storm, the sense that once it arrived, everything would change forever. The quiet routine of ranch life, the safety she and Michael had built for themselves, all of it was precariously balanced on a knife's edge. She set her plate aside and stepped onto the porch, letting the cool evening breeze wash over her. The dying light silhouetted distant rock formation. Somewhere out there, men like Mateo Ruiz were plotting, confident in their power. But Morgan Steele, once a top operator in Delta Force, had never been one to back away. She gently touched the sidearm holstered at her hip, the embodiment of her readiness. Michael joined her, standing close, his presence a steady reassurance. "We'll stand our ground," he said quietly, echoing her own resolve. Morgan gave him a faint smile. Her heart pounded with a mixture of anticipation and defiance. "Yes," she thought, "we will." The setting sun cast the last rays of golden light across the dusty yard, and Morgan braced herself for the darkness to come. The following morning arrived with a sharp clarity in the desert air. Morgan Steele stepped onto the porch of Rancho del Cielo, shoulders squared, mind fixed on the decision she and Michael had made. They would not yield their land to Los Asesinos del Desierto. Over breakfast, they shared a silent understanding that it was time to go on the offensive, to uncover the cartel's methods, and to assist anyone else caught in this growing snare of violence. Later that day, Morgan drove into Nuevo Laredo. The town sat under a dull haze of dust, kicked up by the constant traffic of trucks, vans, and battered cars. Situated near the U.S.-Mexico border, Nuevo Laredo had once been a tranquil place where farmers sold produce at roadside stalls and local families gathered in small cafes. Now it felt eerily subdued. A sense of dread lingered in the streets, an echo of whispered threats and anxious bargains made behind closed doors. Even the police station looked deserted, as though the officers had retreated into the shadows. Unwilling or unable to enforce the law, Morgan parked her truck on a side street, scanning her surroundings. At first glance, it appeared ordinary enough. A row of modest storefronts, a gas station, and a lone diner. Yet she noticed the intangible tension woven through it all. The furtive glances from bystanders, the way people hurried past without making eye contact, and the faint graffiti scrawled on walls, symbols she recognized as markers of Los Asesinos del Desierto. She wondered how long the cartel had been tightening its grip here, and how no one beyond the region seemed to notice or care. She passed by a shuttered bar with dusty windows, recalling rumors that it had once been a bustling watering hole for ranchers coming to town. A for sale sign hung crookedly on its door, looking as though it had been there for months without serious inquiry. This was the chilling reality. Property after property falling under the cartel's domain, whether through terror, blackmail, or forced sale. Los Asesinos del Desierto was gradually bending Nuevo Laredo to its will. Morgan's destination was a small grocery store, owned by Rebecca Mitchell, a resolute woman in her 40s, who had refused to sell out. Rebecca's store was among the few businesses left that operated independently, and Morgan wanted to confirm rumors that the cartel had begun exacting extortion fees. If Los Asesinos del Desierto was pressuring local shopkeepers, Morgan needed the truth, and she needed to ensure no further harm befell the people brave enough to stand their ground. Pushing open the store's glass door, Morgan immediately felt the tension spike. The interior was dimly lit by fluorescent lights, the aisle shelves neatly stocked with canned goods, cereal, and household essentials. At first, she didn't see Rebecca, only heard muffled voices near the counter. Rounding the corner of a display piled with tortillas and bagged snacks, Morgan found the source of the disturbance. 3 men, each wearing black t-shirts emblazoned with an ostentatious skull design, and the words, Los Asesinos del Desierto. Tattoos covered their arms, and the stench of cigarette smoke clung to them as they hovered over Rebecca. The tallest among them, a man who introduced himself as Diego Ramirez, had his hands splayed on the counter as he leaned forward, sneering at the visibly trembling shopkeeper. $2,000 a month, he declared, every syllable laced with intimidation. Pay up, or this place shuts down. You understand? Rebecca's voice shook. I can't afford that, she stammered. I don't have that kind of money. This is just a small store. Diego glanced at one of his cohorts, who promptly reached out and swept an entire rack of canned goods off the shelf. Metal cans clattered violently onto the floor, rolling in every direction. Rebecca gave a startled cry, her expression torn between indignation and fear. One of the other men laughed callously, stepping forward as if to make her cower. Morgan took a slow breath and spoke up, her tone smooth yet resonant. I think you guys should leave before you break anything else. All three turned to face her, their eyes registering surprise that someone would interrupt. They seemed to size her up, noticing her athletic build, but reading her only as a solitary woman. A sneer curled at the corner of Diego's mouth. Senora, it looks like you don't know the rules around here. This is our town now, he said, stepping closer so she could smell his cheap cologne. Morgan didn't blink. Then let me ask you one thing, she replied softly. If I kill you right here, who's going to collect the money for your crew? Her gaze never wavered, and in one fluid motion she shifted her stance to a subtle position of readiness. Diego flashed a confused, almost affronted expression, unsure if this was some kind of bluff. You think you can threaten me in my own territory? He spat and gestured to one of his underlings. Put this bitch in her place. The man lunged at Morgan with a fist cocked high. Calmly, she sidestepped, caught his wrist and swept his legs out from under him, sending him crashing to the floor. Before he could react, she drew her Glock 19 from inside her jacket, pressing the muzzle against Diego's forehead in a practiced movement. The tension in the air soared. Diego froze, eyes wide, the other men realizing how quickly the tables had turned. For a stunned moment, none of them moved. Even Rebecca was speechless, hardly believing her eyes. Diego raised his hands slowly, all trace of bravado replaced by genuine fear. Who the hell are you? He muttered. Morgan's voice was so controlled it bordered on lethal calm. I suggest you leave, and take your friend with you. Diego took a moment to gauge her threat, then sneered. You'll regret this, Senora, he warned, stepping back as Morgan lowered the Glock but kept it firmly in her grip. His underlings scrambled to their feet, one of them rubbing his head where it had met the ground. Before they retreated out the door, Diego fired off one final warning, his voice shaking with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. You have no idea what you've wrapped. They fled, and the shop settled into a tense stillness, as if the walls themselves were letting out a collective sigh of relief. Rebecca slumped against the counter. My God, she murmured, voice still quivering. I was so scared they'd kill me. They've already threatened some of the other shopkeepers. Morgan returned her Glock to its concealed holster, then helped Rebecca right the display stand. They won't stop, Morgan said, her tone quietly empathetic. They'll be back, or they'll send more men. You need to be careful, tears pooled in Rebecca's eyes. I'm just trying to run a store, pay my bills. I can't fight them. Morgan placed a reassuring hand on Rebecca's shoulder. Stay safe for now. Keep your doors locked. If you hear anything, call me immediately, she instructed. Then, trying to lighten Rebecca's burden, Morgan helped clean up some of the items that had been scattered across the floor, though her mind churned with the unpleasant awareness that Los Asesinos del Desierto was already deeply enmeshed in the local community. Wanting more insight, Morgan next went to see Dr. Diego Herrera, whose clinic was just off the main road. It was a modest building with a chipped sign above the entrance, announcing him as the only physician for miles around. The waiting room was nearly empty, except for a young mother cradling a feverish toddler. Dr. Herrera appeared in the doorway after finishing an examination, a kind-faced man in his 50s with graying hair and a perpetually tired gaze. Spotting Morgan, he beckoned her into his office, away from prying ears. Inside, stacks of medical records and supplies cluttered the desk. He gestured for her to sit, then lowered himself into a worn swivel chair. I heard about the trouble at Rebecca's store, he began softly. You're going to make powerful enemies, Miss Steele, Morgan exhaled. That's what I hear, but they're already the enemy, aren't they? I'm just not pretending otherwise. Dr. Herrera nodded gravely. Yes, this gang, Los Asesinos del Desierto, they've turned the town into a pressure cooker of fear. People vanish, or they're found with bullet wounds that look ex-military. Hard to remain neutral in the face of that. Ex-military? Morgan repeated, leaning forward. So, not typical street firearms. Standing up, Dr. Herrera crossed the room to retrieve a small evidence bag from a locked cabinet. I've managed to save a few bullet fragments extracted from men who were brought to me. He held up a piece of battered metal within a clear plastic pouch. This piece here has a distinctive stamping that I traced back to a batch used by the US military in the Middle East. Around a decade ago, it's specialized. Definitely not standard issue for local cops or criminals. Morgan clenched her jaw, meaning someone higher up is supplying them, she said. These men are using more than just local black market guns. They have a pipeline. Dr. Herrera nodded. Exactly. This is bigger than your typical gang activity. Drugs, guns, and I suspect there's more we don't know about. I've treated men with injuries that suggest they've been in genuine combat, not just street brawls. Morgan remembered the dire warnings from David Hawkins. A swirl of concern ran through her thoughts. Thank you, doctor, she said, tapping the evidence bag. This helps confirm what I suspected. There's an organized, well-funded network behind them. He lowered his voice, stepping closer. Just be careful, he urged. People around here have learned to keep their heads down. If you continue like this, you'll draw more attention from them. Morgan's mouth quirked into a grim smile. I've never been good at hiding, she admitted, and I don't intend to let them devour this entire town. Bidding him goodbye, Morgan slipped out onto the street once more, the punishing sun reflecting off the asphalt. She returned to her truck, mind whirling with possibilities. The bullet fragments told a harrowing story. Sophisticated weapons, possibly smuggled from international suppliers. This was not simply a cartel muscling in on territory. It was a fully operational war machine, with resources that stretched across borders. Night had fallen by the time Morgan arrived back at the ranch. Michael was inside their small command room, reviewing satellite imagery on a large monitor. He looked up, relief flashing in his eyes when he saw she was unharmed. I heard from Rebecca, he said, standing up from the console. She told me what happened. You okay? Morgan set her keys on the nearest table. Yeah, I'm fine, but the situation in town is worse than we realize. They're systematically extorting people, and they have some serious hardware at their disposal, she relayed Dr. Herrera's findings. The evidence of advanced military-grade ammunition. Michael's brow furrowed. So they're more heavily armed than just standard cartel foot soldier. Could be they have connections with arms dealers who supply conflict zones. Morgan nodded. That's exactly what I'm thinking. It was then that her phone vibrated in her pocket. She glanced at the screen. A text from David Hawkins. The message read, "Be careful, they're not alone. Someone else is pulling the strings." That cryptic warning only fueled her determination. She called him back immediately, pressing the phone close to her ear. David answered on the second ring. "Morgan," he said, voice low and serious. "I've been digging into some data. The chatter is intense. Los Asesinos del Desierto is preparing something big, but it's not just about smuggling weapons or drugs. They have another priority, though I haven't pinned it down yet." Morgan exchanged a quick look with Michael. "Do you have any specifics?" she asked. "Not yet," David replied, "but they're working with a group that's more powerful than any street gang or cartel I've come across. I believe it's some sort of global network, maybe a paramilitary outfit with interests in infiltration and intelligence. If I manage to confirm my sources, I'll let you know. In the meantime, watch your back. If I can find out about them, they can find out about me, or anyone else digging too deep." Morgan's mind raced. A global network. That would explain the advanced weapons and the brazen confidence with which they operated. "Understood," she said softly. "Stay safe, David. And thanks." When she hung up, an oppressive silence blanketed the command room. Michael's gaze flicked to the monitor, where flickers of satellite images glowed softly. "The rabbit hole goes deeper," he remarked. Morgan crossed her arms, letting the implications sink in. If Los Asesinos del Desierto was merely a pawn in a grander design, the threat extended beyond one border town or a handful of ranches. It could destabilize entire regions or more. She inhaled deeply, then exhaled, focusing her thought. "We can't wait for them to make the next move," she said at last. "We need to find out what this bigger plan entails, and we need to cut it off before it escalates." Michael nodded. "I'll dig into the real estate records more thoroughly, see if any shell companies show up that could connect them to an international backer. And maybe we should talk to Isabella Martinez again. She might have updated intel from the Mexican side." Agreed. Morgan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was edging toward midnight, yet she felt too restless to sleep. "They attacked a shop in broad daylight today," threatened someone I promised to protect. That's enough reason for me to get proactive. She thought back to the 3 men at Rebecca's store. The malice etched into their faces when they realized she was no pushover. You'll regret this, Diego Ramirez had hissed before retreating. The memory spurred her forward. If they wanted a war, she intended to show them she was no ordinary civilian. Her training, combined with Michael's intelligence background, gave them a fighting chance. More than that, it gave them a moral imperative. Los Asesinos del Desierto had to be stopped, not just for their own sake, but for everyone under the cartel's reign of terror. Michael stood behind her, massaging the tension out of her shoulders. We'll figure this out, he assured her quietly. It's what we do, right? Morgan let herself lean back against him, momentarily comforted by his warmth and steadiness. Yeah, she breathed. It's what we do. She mentally recalled the grim images she had seen in Nuevo Laredo, the shuttered businesses, the uneasy glances from locals, the evidence of advanced weaponry. The thought of that bullet fragment from Doc Herrera's collection flashed in her mind. Its battered edge and cryptic stamp, a symbol of how intricate and well-connected these criminals were. Yet there was no turning back now. Morgan had chosen to stand her ground, and she knew that what began as a matter of personal safety had evolved into a moral crusade. She wasn't merely defending her property, she was defending a vulnerable community. What would you do if you found yourself in Morgan's position? Fight back or walk away? Let us know in the comments. If you're ready for the next chapter in this high-stakes battle, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The war is coming, and you won't want to miss what happens next. By the time Morgan Steele and Michael Carter set off toward Bodega Roja, the night sky had already draped itself over the desert, like a vast black curtain dotted with faint stars. Both of them were keenly aware that this excursion would be far more dangerous than any reconnaissance they had carried out before. Reports of heavily armed sentries, suspicious truck deliveries, and advanced surveillance systems filled Morgan with a grim sense of anticipation. While she had faced formidable opponents in her Delta Force days, the intelligence she and Michael had gathered suggested that Bodega Roja was no run-of-the-mill criminal hideout. It was large, heavily guarded, and rumored to be pivotal to Los Asesinos del Desierto's broader operation. The drive was nerve-wracking in its quietness. Their vehicle's headlights were switched off for most of the journey, relying on night vision goggles and the faint glow of the moon to guide them along dusty back roads. Michael navigated with a GPS device on low brightness, each beep of the unit sounding unnaturally loud in the hush of the desert. Morgan said little. She focused on preparing herself mentally, going over infiltration tactics, recalling the layout Michael had pieced together from satellite images, and rehearsing possible points of cover. The memory of Mateo Ruiz's threats loomed in her mind like a specter. Though she had no doubts about her own capabilities, she understood this operation demanded absolute caution. Bodega Roja finally came into view beyond a slight rise in the terrain. It was a sprawling warehouse complex, its corrugated metal walls faintly illuminated by floodlights at each corner. As they approached, Morgan guided the vehicle to a stop behind a natural rise of rock. Both of them exited quietly, weapons in hand, Morgan clutching her customized M4, Michael armed with a high-powered rifle fitted with a suppressor. From their vantage point, they observed the facility through night vision binoculars. The immediate impression was of a place under tight, militant control. Tall fencing, watchtowers at 2 corners, and squads of men patrolling with the disciplined gait, reminiscent of trained security forces, rather than the casual strut of street thugs. Morgan's voice was barely above a whisper. "This is bigger than I expected," she said, scanning the perimeter. She could see trucks lined up outside, each bearing Mexican license plates. One by one, crates and containers were unloaded, manhandled by tough-looking laborers wearing black cargo pants and bulletproof vests. Men with assault rifles roamed the yard, pausing to check each container before it was hauled inside. Over the calm earpiece, Michael breathed steadily. Fixated on memorizing guard patrol patterns, he hissed softly. "See that row of semis near the far side? They're from Chihuahua, according to the plates. I've seen them before on one of my watch lists. They've been flagged for possible arms trafficking." Morgan nodded, though she wasn't surprised, which means at least one of these shipments likely contains weapons or contraband. And those they're no amateurs. She observed a small group stationed near the southern gate. Their formation and gear suggested ex-military or mercenary. They carried themselves with a certain professionalism, regular scanning of the perimeter, minimal chatter, a readiness in their posture that told Morgan they wouldn't fall prey to easy distractions. During her time in Delta Force, she'd studied the body language of skilled operators. These men reeked of that same capacity for organized violence. At length, Michael took out a compact digital camera with a telephoto lens. He magnified the license plates on several trucks. "I'll run these numbers through a database when we get back," he murmured. "Let's see who owns them." Morgan's gaze shifted to the door of the warehouse. Look at the signage, or lack thereof. No company name, just a code number. BDR07. Something tells me this is one of many Bodega Roja sites. She could feel the tension emanating from the place, like the hum of a beehive disturbed by an unseen hand. The thought crossed her mind that, if their infiltration went south, Bodega Roja could become a death trap. But they had little choice. If they wanted to piece together the puzzle of advanced weaponry and corruption ties, they needed first-hand intelligence. They spent nearly an hour lying prone behind the rocky outcrop, taking photographs and logging every detail. The crux of the intelligence came when Michael carefully examined one particular black SUV that rolled onto the property. He zoomed in on the license plate, tapped it into a handheld device, and frowned. "This SUV's been flagged in an Interpol notice," he whispered. "It's connected to an international arms smuggling ring. That ring is rumored to supply everything from small arms to anti-tank weapons in conflict zones." Morgan exhaled slowly. "That means Los Asesinos del Desierto isn't just a local cartel. They're part of a global arms trafficking network. If they're storing or distributing that kind of firepower here, it's only a matter of time before we see it used on either side of the border." They decided to edge closer, hoping to slip around the perimeter to a vantage point that might give them a glimpse inside. Moving in the darkness, they skirted the fence line, careful to keep out of range of security cameras perched atop tall lampposts. The desert wind whipped up small clouds of dust, which at times provided them cover, but also stung their eyes when they tried to concentrate on the ground ahead. Eventually, they found a spot behind a row of discarded metal crates that gave a partial view of the cargo entrance. Moments later, a sleek, armored SUV rolled through the gate. It looked more formidable than the trucks outside. Its windows tinted black, its surface coated with an ominous matte finish. Out stepped Salvador Morales, flanked by two men whose bearing radiated lethal competence. Morgan's stomach twisted the instant she recognized him. She remembered the name from old CIA dossier, a highly connected international arms broker who had supplied extremist groups in the Middle East, Africa, and Eastern Europe, known for funneling weapons to whichever side paid more. He was as notorious for his deals as for eluding capture. Morgan zoomed in with her binoculars. Heart pound. She watched as Salvador greeted Mateo Ruiz, who emerged from the warehouse with a broad smirk. The two men shook hands like old partners, then vanished inside. "This just got a lot worse," Morgan muttered, and her mind raced to connect the dots. If Salvador Morales is here, it means world-class arms dealing is happening under our noses. This is no small-time operation. There's someone else orchestrating all of this from behind the curtain. Michael snapped several discrete photographs. "I'll send these to Hawkins," he said. "Let's see if we can confirm Morales' movements across borders. If he's meeting with Mateo, then Los Asesinos del Desierto is just one piece of a bigger scheme." They lay in silence for a few tense minutes, listening to the faint echoes of trucks revving, men shouting orders, and heavy crates being dragged across concrete floors. Morgan sensed that something significant was being loaded or unloaded. She thought about the men in Nuevo Laredo who carried advanced rifles with U.S. military markings. Perhaps the weapons had traveled through this very warehouse. As if to confirm her suspicions, the hangar door opened again, briefly exposing a glimpse of large wooden crates, strapped tight, each stenciled with cryptic codes and hazard labels. She caught a glance of metal racks inside, possibly containing missiles or rocket launch. Under the harsh overhead lighting, she saw enough to suspect that the inventory ranged from automatic weapons to potentially more destructive gear. Her pulse quickened, a primal mix of dread and adrenaline. She had witnessed the havoc wrought by well-armed insurgents in combat zones overseas. She couldn't allow that to spill unchecked across the border. Once the door slid shut, Morgan and Michael withdrew from the vantage point, pressing themselves against the exterior of an old shipping container to regroup. "We've seen enough," Morgan said quietly. "We should report this to Dave. Let him run it up the chain. But first I want to figure out who's backing these shipments. Morales might be big, but I doubt even he's the end of the line." In the dim glow of the moon, Michael typed out a quick message on a secure phone, attaching the photographs of Salvador Morales and the suspicious trucks. Then they carefully made their way back to the rocky outcrop where they'd left their vehicle. The entire time, Morgan felt the weight of eyes upon them, as though the desert itself bristled with unseen watchers. She answered it in the command center, the screens around her showing real-time feeds from the ranch's security cameras. "Got your intel?" David said. "Salvador Morales is definitely on an international watch list for arms dealing. He's rumored to work with extremist factions and even rogue states looking to destabilize regions. But if he's operating in tandem with Mateo Ruiz's cartel, there's likely someone else they answer to. Someone who can handle the complexities of cross-continental traffic." Morgan sat at the edge of her seat. "That was my thought too. Someone bigger than the local ring. Any idea who?" David hesitated. "We suspect an organization called La Sombra Negra, the Black Shadow. They're not just arms dealers. They're said to have their own intelligence apparatus, manipulating conflicts to profit from them. The group is extremely secretive, rumored to have tentacles in various governments." Michael and Morgan exchanged a grim look. She recalled the advanced ballistic evidence from Dr. Herrera, the sophisticated gear at Bodega Roja, the fear-gripping local farmers. All of it fit the pattern of a well-financed, internationally connected entity. "So La Sombra Negra might be the puppet master here," she said softly. "Everything points that way," David confirmed. "We've pulled fragments of intel from multiple agencies, but it's always incomplete. They're ghosts, popping up in conflict zones, fueling wars with weapon shipments, and forging alliances with corrupt officials. Then they vanish, leaving a trail of chaos." Morgan clenched her jaw. "If they're fueling this cartel with high-grade weapons, we're dealing with a global threat that can outgun most law enforcement in the area. And Bodega Roja looks like their pipeline." Over the next few hours, Morgan, Michael, and David pieced together every thread they could find on La Sombra Negra. The name had surfaced in classified memos, scattered across intelligence agencies, spanning from the CIA to European government. One consistent detail was that the group had a triumvirate of leaders: Miguel Vargas, the mastermind who handled strategic decisions and cultivated alliances with government figures; Alejandro Castillo, a financial genius who laundered money through countless shell corporations, ensuring a continuous flow of capital; Leona Delgado, a diplomat of sorts, forging relationships with power players in politics, business, and law enforcement, bribing or blackmailing them into compliance. Morgan stared at a mosaic of information on a large screen. The operators at Bodega Roja, the Thysit weapons, Salvador Morales' presence. It all tied back to La Sombra Negra. "They're orchestrating this from the shadows," she murmured, "and Los Asesinos del Desierto is just their ground force in this region." The scale of the conspiracy left her uneasy. This wasn't a matter of a single cartel wanting control. It was a node in a global network dedicated to profit through human misery. If La Sombra Negra had a foothold here, the entire border area might soon erupt in violence, or become a smuggling superhighway for advanced arms. Morgan thought of the people in Nuevo Laredo, those forced to live under the cartel's thumb. If La Sombra Negra succeeded, the region would become their puppet, and the consequences could spiral well beyond local ranchers losing their land. Nonetheless, Morgan was resolved to act. Her training had taught her to press forward in the face of overwhelming adversity. She refused to stand by, letting a criminal empire flourish at the expense of innocent lives. "We need more direct proof," she finally said, "and we need to disrupt their supply lines. If we can figure out where Morales or the rest of La Sombra Negra is headed next, we might strike a decisive blow." Their next move was to attempt a closer infiltration of Bodega Roja's perimeter, ideally to gather photographic or physical evidence of the weapons being stashed there. They planned to do it discreetly, in and out, before the guards knew they had been compromised. That operation was set for the following night, once they had a better sense of guard rotations. But as often happens in fluid situations, the best-laid plans can collapse in an instant. While Morgan prowled the outskirts of Bodega Roja with practiced stealth, hugging the shadows by the fence, she happened upon a single sentry earlier than expected. The guard's flashlight swept across the darkness, landing right on Morgan's crouched form. Surprise flickered in his eyes, and he shouted a warning in Spanish. Morgan had no choice but to fire. Her suppressed pistol spat 2 rounds into his chest, dropping him instantly. Alarms seemed to explode to life throughout Bodega Roja. Lights flared, sirens wailed, and the shouts of men echoed off the steel walls. The infiltration mission turned abruptly into a scramble for survival. Morgan called Michael over the comm, her breath tight. "I've been made. Guards are converging. I'm near the east fence. We need to extract now." Gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Morgan sprinted along the fence line, returning fire with lethal precision whenever a figure appeared in her path. Her night vision goggles flickered from muzzle flashes, forcing her to blink away the glare. She took down 2 more men armed with assault rifles who tried to flank her, each shot meticulously placed to eliminate them before they could open fire. Meanwhile, Michael, perched on higher ground nearby, provided overwatch. Through his scope, he saw a half-dozen mercenaries swarming out from the warehouse's side entrance. He squeezed the trigger of his suppressed rifle, dropping the lid man. The others scattered for cover, which bought Morgan precious seconds to move. Each shot from Michael's vantage was measured, designed to stall or disrupt the enemy rather than engage in an extended firefight. They could not afford to be pinned down by overwhelming number. In the frantic chaos, Morgan caught sight of the armored SUV they had seen earlier, the one belonging to Salvador Morales. A sudden idea struck her. If she could plant a tracking device on that vehicle, they might salvage intelligence from this botched infiltration. Heart pounding, she dashed behind a row of metal drums, avoiding a hail of bullets. She felt the zing of rounds passing dangerously close, the hush of the desert replaced by an echoing clang each time a bullet struck metal. Adrenaline surged through her veins, sharpening her focus. She spotted the SUV parked near the warehouse's side gate, engines still running. Crouched low, she sprinted across the open gap, ignoring the cries of alarm behind her. "Trackers live," she hissed into her comm, pressing it firmly before darting away. Michael's voice crackled in her ear. "We gotta go." Multiple tangos inbound from the north side. Morgan pivoted, weaving between shipping containers. She lobbed a flashbang behind her, which went off with a thunderous burst of light and sound, disorienting the men chasing her. Then she scrambled up a short stack of crates, clearing the fence with surprising agility. On the other side, Michael stood guard, taking out one last pursuer with a short burst from his rifle. Together, they sprinted back to their vehicle, the wail of sirens and frantic shouts fading into the distance. When they had put enough distance between themselves and Bodega Roja, they paused, breathing heavily, hearts hammering. Morgan inspected her gear, ensuring she was uninjured except for a few bruises and a shallow graze along one arm where a bullet had torn her sleeve. Michael's face was taut with concern. "That got hairy fast," he said, scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. "But at least you managed to tag Morales' SUV. Hopefully, we'll get a location if he moves." Morgan tried to steady her racing pulse, glancing back in the direction of the warehouse. The faint glow of security lights still glimmered in the distance, as though mocking their narrow escape. "They definitely know they've been compromised," she whispered. This was a declaration of war. She climbed into the driver's seat, fighting the tension in her muscles. Michael slid into the passenger side, setting his rifle in the back. He typed a quick message to David Hawkins on his phone, notifying him of the emergency. "We'll regroup at the ranch," he said, turning to Morgan. "But it's certain now. We're not just dealing with a formidable cartel. We're facing an international syndicate that can dispatch a small army at the drop of a hat." Morgan clenched the steering wheel, an unmistakable fire in her eyes. "Then we make sure they learn one thing. We won't be scared off. They pushed us to this point. Now we push back." As she hit the gas, the vehicle rumbled over the rough terrain, leaving Bodega Roja behind in the moonlit darkness. Both of them knew the night's events would escalate matters drastically. Los Asesinos del Desierto had the backing of a clandestine organization known as La Sombra Negra, armed to the teeth and ready to wage a covert war. Morgan had seen enough in her military career to recognize they were stepping onto a battleground far bigger than the desert border. But she also knew that the only way to save her land, and perhaps countless lives on both sides of the border, was to press forward, even if it meant clashing with a shadowy empire that had already claimed too much power. Morgan refused to cede a single inch of ground. The hours after Morgan Steele and Michael Carter's covert observation at Bodega Roja were spent in tense vigilance. Despite their exhaustion, they both knew that Los Asesinos del Desierto could retaliate at any moment. So they fortified Rancho del Cielo once more, double-checked their surveillance systems, and tried unsuccessfully to snatch fragments of rest before dawn. A mechanical voice shouted in Spanish over loudspeakers. "Intruders detected. All personnel, secure the perimeter." Morgan and Michael exchanged a tense look. They sprinted for their original entry point, weaving between crates and dodging guards who now rushed toward the container area. Bullets whizzed past, ricocheting off metal. Another one round tore a chunk out of the fence post they'd just passed. Morgan dropped to a knee and fired several shots, forcing two mercenaries to scramble for cover behind a parked truck. Michael, meanwhile, deftly reopened the gap in the fence. "Move," he shouted, popping off a round that struck one of the mercenaries, sending him reeling. They ducked through the fence, hearts pounding, adrenaline roaring in their ears. Once on the other side, they dashed across the open desert toward their vehicle. An engine roared to life inside the compound, suggesting someone was giving chase. But Morgan and Michael had parked far enough away that they managed to slip into the SUV and peel off. They kicked up a cloud of dust behind them as they sped across the uneven terrain, ignoring the jostling and pitching of the vehicle. Eventually, they reached a paved back road, turning onto it and driving without headlights for several miles until they were sure they hadn't been followed. The sun was fully up by the time they made it back to Rancho del Cielo. Both felt physically battered and emotionally wrung out. But they wasted no time. Michael hurried to their command center, plugging the data siphon into a secure laptop. Morgan locked down the perimeter defenses, then joined him, watching the screen as lines of code and file headers scrolled past. Even at a glance, it was clear that the contents were as explosive as they'd feared. Covert operation summaries, agent names, black budget allocations, and cryptographic keys from various intelligence agencies. "This is insane," Michael said, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's like a consolidated repository of every major intelligence service's worst secret. If La Sombra Negra sells this to hostile nations or extremist groups, entire networks of spies could be burned overnight." Morgan massaged her temples. They must have multiple buyers lined up. Criminal syndicates, rogue states, you name it. Everyone pays top dollar for data that can topple governments or manipulate global markets. She keyed an encrypted call to David Hawkins. Within moments, his voice crackled over the line, tense and urgent. "Morgan, please tell me you have something good." Michael spoke instead. "You'll never believe it, but we found an entire warehouse storing stolen intelligence from multiple agencies. CIA, NSA, Mossad, MI6. We pulled a fraction of it before we had to bug out." David's reaction was immediate. This could ignite an international crisis. If these databases leak, entire undercover operations could collapse. Agents might be assassinated, and countries could accuse each other of espionage on a massive scale. Morgan exhaled, the enormity of it all pressing down on her. "We're aware, but we need a plan to destroy that data before La Sombra Negra can move it, or at the very least ensure it doesn't get sold off in bits and pieces." David's tone turned grim. "Given the scale, we may need to coordinate an international strike, but we don't have time for bureaucratic hurdles. La Sombra Negra could ship these servers tomorrow, and by the time any official operation launches, the data might be scattered around the world. We'll do it ourselves if we have to," Morgan said, steel in her voice. "We can't let them keep that data." A pause hung on the line, and then David sighed. "All right, I'll reach out to a few trusted contacts, see if we can assemble a small task force. But do not move in alone. Morgan, this is beyond dangerous, and you know it. We're not dealing with a simple arms ring. They have the power to blackmail entire nations." Michael glanced at Morgan, nodding in agreement. Neither of them wanted to rush headlong into suicide, yet the urgency was clear. With each passing hour, La Sombra Negra advanced its grand scheme. Morgan privately wondered what final piece of the puzzle the organization was waiting for. A particular buyer? A certain political shift? She shook off her musings and refocused on the immediate threat. As soon as they ended the call, Morgan and Michael pored over the partial data they had. Code names, mission logs, top secret budgets. It was a jigsaw puzzle of clandestine operations. Some files were heavily encrypted. Michael worked to decode what he could, occasionally wincing at the horrifying implications of the partially uncovered data. Lists of double agents, references to nuclear deterrent strategies, advanced research on biometric warfare. Morgan paced behind him, arms folded tight across her chest. We need to figure out the fastest way to neutralize those servers. We can't just blow up the desert without proof or official sanction. She paused, thinking of the container yard. Unless we sabotage them from the inside, she mused. Inject a virus or physically destroy the drives before La Sombra Negra can relocate them. That might mean another infiltration, Michael pointed out. Eyes still on the screen. And next time, they'll be doubly alert, Morgan grimaced. I'm not thrilled about it either. But if we can't do it alone, we coordinate with David's contacts. A small, specialized force. Blow the site. Wipe the data. Then vanish. She recalled the mark of success and fear in the eyes of those mercenaries. La Sombra Negra had no qualms about killing anyone who threatened their profit margins. Yet Morgan felt a fierce determination, rooted in the knowledge that letting these criminals hold the key to so many global secrets was unthinkable. When David called back an hour later, he confirmed her worst suspicion. The data repository could be shipped out any day now. My informants suggest La Sombra Negra has multiple potential buyers, he warned. A few intelligence agencies might even be willing to pay a fortune just to keep these secrets out of enemy hands. But if a hostile foreign power outbids them, you can imagine the fallout. Morgan kept her voice steady. We'll handle it. Just give me a heads up when you have an extraction team ready to link up. All right, David replied, the weight of the situation coloring every syllable. But be aware, La Sombra Negra won't go down quietly. This is the biggest threat we've ever encountered. She hung up, turning to Mike. We have one shot at this, and we can't fail. If they move the servers to another location, we'll lose our advantage. Michael nodded, hand drifting to rest on a pistol at his hip. We'd better prepare. One way or another, we'll end this. A hush settled over the command center. Morgan glanced at the flickering screens, each displaying snippets of the stolen intelligence. She imagined how many lives could be ruined if these secrets were unleashed. Lives of agents who believed their identities were secure, of officials who had dedicated their careers to covert operations meant to preserve peace. Let's do it, she whispered, half to herself and half to Michael. We started this fight. We'll finish it. The night pressed down over Rancho del Cielo with a heavy anticipatory hush. For days, Morgan Steele and Michael Carter had prepared for this moment. The final assault on Bodega Roja. The intelligence gleaned from their infiltration, combined with Luis Ortega's insider knowledge and Isabella Martinez's resources, pointed to a crucial showdown. Mateo Ruiz and Salvador Morales planned to move the last shipment of stolen data. Information that could destabilize entire nations within the hour. If Morgan's team failed to stop them, the data would vanish into La Sombra Negra's deeper networks, lost for good. Morgan assembled the group in the ranch's living room, a space normally filled with the warm glow of table lamps and the scent of coffee. Tonight it felt more like a makeshift war room. Maps of Bodega Roja lay spread across the dining table, marked with red ink to indicate guard towers, watchtowers, and the known location of the stolen servers. Michael Carter hovered by the table, a rifle leaning within reach. As the team's best marksman, his job was to provide overwatch and neutralize key threats from a distance. He'd spent the past hours cleaning and calibrating his sniper rifle, ensuring it would not fail him at a critical moment. Luis Ortega, wearing a borrowed tactical vest, stood apart from the group, face tense. He'd been a member of Los Asesinos del Desierto until recently, but after realizing the cartel had left him for dead, he chose to side with Morgan. His knowledge of Bodega Roja's interior layout was invaluable, though Morgan still watched him warily, aware that deep loyalties weren't easily broken. Isabella Martinez, a special agent from Mexico's intelligence service, studied the map with arms crossed. Once an anti-corruption operative, she'd been sidelined by Hector Valdez's influence. Now, she was determined to bring him down by exposing the link between Valdez, Mateo Ruiz, and the shadowy La Sombra Negra. Her hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and she wore civilian clothes rigged with concealed holsters for maximum mobility. David Hawkins joined them through a secure video feed from an undisclosed location. His role was digital support, hacking the mercenaries' communications, and when the time came, shutting down the security systems at Bodega Roja. Morgan tapped the map. We're executing a multi-pronged assault. First, we cut their power and jam their communication line. David will handle that remotely. Once we're sure their alarms won't call in reinforcements, we breach from 3 sides. Michael, you'll set up on the ridge north of the compound, and take out any watchers or patrols who might spot us too early. Michael nodded. I'll place a remote sensor near the main road as well, in case they try to bring extra men from outside. The moment they move vehicles, we'll know. Good, Morgan said, then turned to Isabella. You and I will lead the main infiltration. We'll be going in where we expect the servers to be, according to Ortega. That's the warehouse building near the center. Correct. Luis Ortega stepped forward and traced a line on the map with his finger. Yes, that's where they keep the high-value cargo. But be advised, Mateo and Salvador have their best men patrolling that area. Possibly ex-military, heavily armed. They won't go down easily. Isabella's eyes hardened. We didn't come here looking for easy. David's voice crackled over the feed. Just remember, if you cut off their comms, you'll limit your own as well. I'll try to keep a low-frequency emergency channel open for you, but once the jammers are activated, it'll be hit or miss. None of them wanted to become heroes. They simply refused to let criminals like Mateo Ruiz and Salvador Morales hold the world's most sensitive secrets hostage. Outside, the ranch was bathed in darkness, the moon concealed behind drifting cloud. It felt as though the entire desert held its breath, waiting for the confrontation to come. She inhaled slowly. We have 1 hour until they move the last shipment. That means we leave in 15 minutes. She paused, letting her gaze sweep the room. We know the stakes. Let's do this. A subdued chorus of affirmations followed. Luis Ortega quietly checked the pistol Morgan had lent him. Isabella double-checked her sidearms, and Michael pulled on a headset for long-range communication. Morgan snatched her M4 rifle from its stand by the couch, flicking the safety off. The clock ticked steadily, each second eroding whatever advantage they still possessed. When it was time, they departed Rancho del Cielo, in 2 vehicles, lights off, forging a path through the desert roads under the cloak of night. The compound at Bodega Roca glowed with artificial light, floodlights erected around the perimeter, and watchtowers that scanned the horizon. Through night vision goggles, Morgan saw the silhouettes of armed men pacing the fences. The group parked their vehicles a quarter-mile away behind an outcrop of rocks, slipping out into the cool desert air. Michael broke off first, scaling a rocky ridge that overlooked the compound. He carried his sniper rifle in a padded case along with a tripod for stability. Once set up, he would have a clear shot at the main entrance and the guard towers. Morgan, Isabella, and Luis Ortega proceeded on foot, keeping low. They all wore dark clothing and carried suppressed weapons. In the near distance, they heard an occasional truck engine rumble, signifying last-minute preparations for the data shipment. David Hawkins' voice buzzed through Morgan's earpiece, faint but discernible. I'm in their system, disabling the power grid in 30 seconds. Morgan signaled for the group to halt. Right on cue, the floodlights flickered, then died. An alarm somewhere inside the complex tried to engage, but David had jammed the frequency. The courtyard lit up sporadically under backup batteries, but it was far dimmer than before. Confusion erupted among the guards. Michael seized the moment. From his vantage, he sighted 2 men near a guard tower. His scope's crosshairs aligned with the first guard's chest, and with a gentle squeeze of the trigger, the figure dropped silently. He adjusted, took aim again, and another shot found its mark, leaving the second guard crumpled. A third, alarmed by the sudden disturbance, started to raise his rifle, but Michael's bullet reached him first. Meanwhile, Morgan and Isabella sprinted across the open ground, hugging the building's shadow. Luis Ortega trailed behind. Carrying a submachine gun, they reached a side entrance, scanning the dark corridor. With a swift motion, Morgan kicked open the door. The interior reeked of oil, burnt electronics, and dust. Inside, the corridor branched in 2 directions, one heading toward an administrative block, the other descending into a large storage area. According to Ortega's intel, this storage zone was where they would find the servers, and likely Mateo Ruiz and Salvador Morales. They advanced carefully, listening for footsteps or the rasp of radio chatter. Suddenly, voices echoed from ahead. Morgan signaled to Isabella to take cover behind a stack of crates. 2 armed thugs wearing tactical vests rushed down the corridor, apparently responding to the partial blackout. Isabella nodded to Morgan, who moved first, leveling her silenced M4. Pop, pop. The men dropped before they could shout a warning. They continued onward. The building vibrated with tension, the hiss of disrupted power lines and muffled curses from guards trying to coordinate. Michael radioed in softly, taking down a machine gunner in the watchtower. A single shot rang out in the distance, and the faint glow of muzzle flash lit the ridge for a split second. Morgan and Isabella crept around a corner, emerging into a high-ceilinged loading bay. There, under the beam of emergency lights, stood none other than Mateo Ruiz and Salvador Morales. Mateo, tall and imposing, barked orders at a cluster of mercenaries. Salvador, sporting an unruffled air, clutched a metallic case. Morgan guessed it contained the last of the stolen data. Luis Ortega froze beside Morgan, gripping his weapon. He recognized friends turned foes in the mercenary ranks. Taking a breath, he stepped forward, shouting, "Betrayal has its price." Mateo, then he opened fire on the nearest guard, hitting him in the side. Chaos erupted. Mateo's head snapped around. He spotted Morgan and Isabella crouched near a forklift. "They're here," he roared. "Kill them all." The mercenaries responded instantly, unleashing a barrage of suppressed rifle shots. Bullets pinged off metal crates, and Isabella ducked behind the forklift's tire. Returning fire in short, disciplined bursts. Morgan rolled to a stack of pallets, taking aim at a guard who strayed too close. In the melee, Michael provided covering shots from outside, through a glass skylight overhead. He picked off mercenaries patrolling a catwalk. Each time one stepped into the open, Michael's scope found them. Bodies dropped, sowing confusion in the enemy ranks. From behind a stack of shipping crates, Morgan glimpsed Salvador Morales dart across the floor, gripping that steel briefcase. She fired at him, but he vanished behind a pillar. Meanwhile, Mateo stood in the center, face contorted with rage, shouting directives as men rushed to secure the servers. Luis Ortega, fueled by anger at his former comrades, advanced recklessly. He nailed one mercenary in the shoulder, sending him spinning. Another turned, ready to cut Luis down, but Morgan quickly placed a bullet in that man's chest. He collapsed with a strangled cry. All around them, muzzle flashes lit the gloom as the fight intensified. The floor echoed with frantic footsteps, shouted curses, and the acrid stench of gunpowder. Morgan took a moment to reload, slamming a fresh magazine into her M4. Isabella mirrored her, eyes narrowed in fierce concentration. Suddenly, Mateo Ruiz locked eyes with Morgan across the dimly lit floor. She could sense the hatred emanating from the man who had threatened her ranch, tried to kill her multiple times, and now stood at the brink of unleashing stolen intelligence upon the world. He raised an automatic pistol and opened fire. Morgan dove behind a crate, bullets ripping through its flimsy side. She felt debris shower her as the wood splintered around her. Then the alarm beeped in her earpiece. Michael's voice. "Morgan, watch out. He's moving your way." But she didn't need the warning. Mateo Ruiz's footsteps pounded against the floor, and as Morgan spun, she saw the savage gleam in his eyes. He threw the empty pistol aside, drawing a large combat knife. Morgan barely had time to switch from her rifle to a smaller blade, strapped to her thigh. Mateo Ruiz closed the distance with startling speed, revealing the raw physical power that had made him the most feared boss in Los Asesinos del Desierto. He lunged, a vicious overhead stab that Morgan sidestepped at the last instant. Her training kicked in, Delta Force reflexes refined over years of close-quarters combat. He swung again, aiming for her midsection. Morgan pivoted sideways, letting the blade whistle past her torso. She countered with a slash aimed at his forearm, but Mateo twisted, deflecting her blow with his own knife. Sparks flickered where steel met steel. Around them, the firefight continued, gunshots echoing in the cavernous bay. Morgan caught a glimpse of Isabella exchanging fire with two mercenaries. Luis Ortega tried to flank them, his face grim with determination, but she couldn't afford to watch. Mateo pressed the attack, slashing low to force her back. Morgan cursed under her breath. He was bigger, stronger, and arguably more ruthless. She feigned left, then darted right, her blade slicing a shallow cut across Mateo's bicep. He snarled, retaliating with a punch that clipped her shoulder. The force rattled her, pain jolting through her arm. She gritted her teeth, refusing to show weakness. Mateo pivoted, launching a flurry of quick stabs. Morgan parried them, her boots sliding on the debris-strewn floor. She recognized the technique. He'd likely received formal military training before turning to cartel life. His advantage was brute strength. Hers was agility. When he lunged again, aiming for her throat, Morgan ducked low and drove her elbow into his ribcage. He staggered, momentarily winded, allowing her to sweep his leg. He crashed onto his back, gasping. She didn't hesitate. She dropped onto him, trying to pin his knife arm. But Mateo was too strong. He roared, twisting free, and reversed their positions. Now he pinned her with his knee, pressing his blade toward her throat. A surge of adrenaline flooded Morgan's system. She forced her forearm against his wrist, halting the blade an inch from her neck. Tendons stood out in her arms as she fought to keep the steel from biting into her flesh. Mateo leered down at her, sweat dripping from his brow, eyes full of murderous intent. He hissed, "You think you've won? Even if you kill me, you've only delayed the inevitable." Morgan grunted, channeling every ounce of strength into twisting the knife away. She freed her other hand, blindly grasping for anything to use as leverage. Her fingertips brushed the hilt of her own combat knife, which she drew. Summoning her last reserve of power, she heaved her hips upward, unbalancing Mateo just enough. In a fluid motion, she snatched her knife and drove it into his neck. His eyes widened, body stiffening as blood spurted from the wound. Then his eyes glazed over. Mateo Ruiz, the terror of Los Asesinos del Desierto, lay dead at her feet. Before Morgan could catch her breath, a flash of movement drew her attention. Near the loading bay's exit, she spotted Salvador Morales, clutching a slim case and sprinting toward a side door. He disappeared into the darkness, carrying the vital stolen data. Cursing, Morgan pressed a hand to her throbbing shoulder. She forced herself to focus on the bigger picture. Mateo Ruiz was gone, but the real puppet masters of La Sombra Negra, Miguel Vargas, and others, remained at large, and now Salvador Morales had escaped with the last piece of data. Gunfire in the loading bay waned, replaced by sporadic bursts of suppressed shots, as Isabela Martinez and Luis Ortega dealt with the final remnants of resistance. Michael radioed in from outside, confirming that no additional reinforcements were arriving. David Hawkins' jamming had effectively quarantined Bodega Roca from calling for help. Morgan gritted her teeth and surveyed the carnage. The improvised assault had inflicted significant damage on the cartel's infrastructure. She saw bullet-riddled crates, equipment stands knocked over, and unconscious guards scattered across the floor. Isabela stepped forward, weapon raised, checking pulses to see which mercenaries were still alive. Ortega lingered near the main corridor, face pale as he stared at the body of a former colleague. Approaching Morgan, Isabela gave a slight nod. "We've secured most of the area." A few men fled once the fight turned against them. Her gaze dropped to the slain form of Mateo Ruiz, and her expression tightened. "I guess that's one less monster to worry about. But we lost Morales, didn't we?" Morgan wiped sweat from her brow, wincing at the bruising on her shoulder. "Yeah," he slipped out. "I saw him carrying a case, probably the final batch of stolen data. He's taking it to Miguel Vargas." Isabela cursed in Spanish. "So this wasn't the last battle, was it?" "No," Morgan replied. "Not by a long shot. But at least we took down their local operation. Bodega Roca is finished." They regrouped with Luis Ortega, near a stack of equipment. He glanced uncertainly at the body of Mateo Ruiz, an odd mix of relief and sorrow in his eyes. "I never imagined it would end like this," he mumbled. "But that had to be done." Morgan studied him for a beat, recalling how precarious his loyalties had seemed, yet he had fought alongside them, even risking his life to sabotage his old comrades. "Thank you," she said softly, "for not turning on us." Ortega attempted a smile, but his eyes were haunted. "Mateo killed any loyalty I had left when he sacrificed our people for his ambitions. And once I realized how big this organization was, La Sombra Negra is not just a cartel, it's something else, something bigger." From overhead speakers, a faint crackle announced David Hawkins' voice breaking through the jamming. "Morgan, do you copy?" She pressed a hand to her earpiece. "I'm here. You need to see this," David said, sounding urgent. "We intercepted a partial transmission from Salvador Morales' getaway vehicle. He's heading for the border and it looks like he's signaling Miguel Vargas. We caught fragments indicating they plan to meet on the Mexican side." Morgan's heart sank. "Of course, they'll shift to a new stronghold. Did you pinpoint the location?" "Working on it," David replied. "Stand by." Michael jogged inside, rifle slung over his shoulder. He paused to catch his breath. "Perimeter's clear. Most of the mercenaries are down or have fled. No sign of Morales. So what's next?" Morgan locked eyes with him. "We keep going. We can't let him deliver that data to Vargas. If La Sombra Negra consolidates all these stolen intel files, they'll be unstoppable. We've come this far. We have to finish it." Michael nodded, flipping open a small tablet. "We should destroy anything salvageable in this compound. Keep them from regrouping." She glanced around at the battered warehouse. The servers and crates that once held stolen intelligence had largely been erased or moved by Mateo. But still, random scraps of hardware and partial shipments remained. Set charges, she decided, voice firm. We can't let them recoup any of it. Isabella, help him rig the place to blow. Ortega, you secure any surviving guards. We'll need them for questioning. Turning away from Mateo's corpse, Morgan limped toward a series of large crates lined against a wall. Inside them, she found shattered remains of servers and half-empty racks of hard drives. She rummaged through them, quickly verifying none contained critical data. Then she and Isabella placed small explosive charges at structural weak points throughout the loading bay. Once everything was prepared, they withdrew to a safe distance near the compound entrance. Ortega had managed to cuff 2 wounded mercenaries who might yield information later. Outside, the night was calm, but for the occasional crackle of flames licking at debris. Morgan signaled, and Michael triggered the charges. A series of muted booms reverberated through the desert air, followed by bursts of flame as the interior of Bodega Roja collapsed under its own weight. The thick, acrid scent of burning electronics wafted across the compound, a testament to the operation they had just obliterated. In the flickering light of the fire, Morgan's phone vibrated. David Hawkins again. She raised it to her ear. Go ahead. David, I got a lock on Morales's general direction. He's heading straight for a known crossing near the border. If he's meeting Vargas, they'll likely relocate to an undisclosed site, but we do have a lead on the region. There's a safe house rumored to belong to Miguel Vargas. Coordinates are still approximate. Morgan stared at the smoldering ruins. She felt exhaustion pulling at every muscle, but her mind buzzed with the necessity of finishing what they'd started. Send me everything you have. We'll meet them head on. Morgan Steele, Michael Carter, Isabella Martinez, and Luis Ortega sped southward in 2 vehicles, their headlights muted against the sprawling desert. Every mile took them closer to the Mexican border, and if their intel was right, closer to Salvador Morales. According to David Hawkins' intercepted communications, Morales was rendezvousing with Miguel Vargas at a clandestine stronghold. Mateo Ruiz might be dead, and Bodega Roja might lie in ruins, but La Sombra Negra had not been extinguished. Morgan gripped the steering wheel, her injured shoulder aching each time she braked on loose gravel or swerved to avoid potholes. The small talk in the car was minimal, overshadowed by the relentless urgency of their mission. She glanced over at Michael in the passenger seat. His expression was grim, a mixture of exhaustion and resolve, with his sniper rifle resting behind the seat. He kept an eye on the GPS readout that David had hacked together, charting Morales's probable path. Meanwhile, in the back, Isabella quietly fielded encrypted calls on a burner phone, coordinating with Mexican contacts who might help them slip past additional checkpoints. In the second vehicle trailing them, Luis Ortega drove while overseeing the 2 wounded mercenaries they had captured, a last chance for gleaning more information if needed. Morgan frowned at a line of taillights on the horizon, suspecting yet another ad hoc checkpoint. Over the last several miles, they had passed multiple improvised roadblocks, manned by suspicious men with automatic weapons. Some belonged to local cartels or paramilitary forces. Others seemed loyal to Hector Valdez, the corrupt Mexican official who had once shielded La Sombra Negra. Yet through Isabella's well-placed bribes, false identification, and a bit of strategic intimidation, they had managed to. The next checkpoint proved more formidable. Armed men stood behind concrete barriers, scanning every vehicle with high-powered flashlights. Morgan and Isabella exchanged a tense glance as they rolled forward. David's voice crackled through the earpiece, barely audible over the hum of the engine.
I'm picking up heavy encryption traffic, he warned. Likely Vargas's men. Stay sharp. Isabella put on a stoic mask, leaning out the window to converse with one of the guards in Spanish. The man, short and stocky, glowered at them, rifle slung across his chest. He demanded identification. At which point Isabella produced a forged set of documents claiming they were part of a special investigative unit. After a tense exchange, the guard waved them through, perhaps convinced by the official-looking badges, or perhaps intimidated by the unwavering confidence in Morgan's posture. Luis followed in the second vehicle, employing the same ruse. The group exhaled once they passed. Morgan accelerated, mindful they still had miles to go before they reached the fabled secret base where Salvador Morales was headed. When they finally crested a ridge, a sprawling encampment sprawled below.
a cluster of low buildings encircled by a double fence and watchtowers. Floodlights arced across the perimeter, revealing armed patrols roving the grounds. The logo of La Sombra Negra, a stylized black shadow, was nowhere visible, but Morgan recognized the hallmarks of an expertly defended compound. Intel says Morales arrived about 20 minutes ago, David informed them. He's meeting with Miguel Vargas in an underground facility at the southern edge. Expect heavy defenses. Also, I've confirmed Hector Valdez is here. 2, he personally flew in by helicopter earlier. Morgan's pulse quickened. Valdez had orchestrated the corruption that allowed La Sombra Negra to thrive. If he was on site, they had a chance to cut the head off the entire operation. But that also meant they would face professionals, possibly ex-military or special forces, under Vargas's command. They parked in a dry riverbed half a mile away. Under the moonlight, the team readied their weapons. Michael hunched over a portable monitor, scanning satellite images. David provided in real time. The compound's southwestern side offered a blind spot in the watchtower coverage. "All right," Morgan said, voice low but firm. "This is where it all comes together. Morales has the stolen data. Vargas is the real power behind La Sombra Negra. And Valdez is the corrupt official backing them. If we want to end this, we have to take them down tonight." Isabella checked her sidearm with grim determination. "We can't let that intel leave Mexico. If they succeed, they'll be able to blackmail entire governments." Morgan nodded. "We'll divide into 2 squads. Michael and Luis handle the perimeter, neutralizing guards and watchtowers. Isabella and I will head straight for the underground facility to confront Vargas and Morales." Over the earpiece, David interjected, "I'll loop the security cameras as best as I can, but they've got a robust system. Don't rely on it for too long. Once they realize you're inside, the alarm will go out." Morgan acknowledged him, shoulders tensed. This was it, the final confrontation. The stakes dwarfed everything they'd faced thus far. If they failed, La Sombra Negra would vanish deeper underground, armed with the world's most sensitive data. If they succeeded, they could shatter a criminal empire that had thrived in the shadows for years. She glanced at Michael, who gave a tight nod of reassurance, and then motioned for the group to move out. Under the cover of darkness, the 4 split up. Michael and Luis circled west, aiming to snipe the watchtower guards and sabotage any backup generator. Isabella and Morgan crept to the south fence, where they found a drainage tunnel that, according to David's intel, led inside the compound. They crawled through the narrow concrete passage, water dripping ominously. Above them, heavy footsteps signaled patrolling guards on the surface. At times, Morgan felt her heart hammer against her ribs, half expecting to run into an armed sentry. Yet luck favored them, and they emerged in a secluded storage area. Stacked crates of illicit contraband lined the walls, drugs, weapons, and more advanced technology. The hum of servers indicated a nearby data center. A hushed exchange in Spanish drifted through the corridor. Pressing herself against a crate, Morgan peeked around the corner. In a makeshift command room, she spotted Miguel Vargas, tall, impeccably dressed, exuding a calculated menace. His hair was slicked back, and his expression radiated confidence. Salvador Morales stood beside him, still clutching that steel briefcase containing the stolen data. Hector Valdez loomed in the background, arms folded, a smug twist to his lip. Morgan managed to slip behind a server rack with Isabella close behind. They overheard fragments of conversation. "Vargas, we're no longer just selling data. We're building an intelligence network of our own. Morales, once we have enough leverage, entire governments will dance to our tune, Valdez, and will enforce it with military force if necessary." Morgan's blood ran cold. This was bigger than any single criminal enterprise. Vargas intended to create a shadow intelligence agency, unbound by any law. With the stolen servers from CIA, NSA, Mossad, and MI6, they could manipulate global events, pit nations against each other, and rake in fortunes from endless conflict. Isabella pressed a hand to her mouth, eyes widened. "They're talking about controlling politics, economics, everything." Morgan silently gestured that they needed to alert Michael and Luis. But before she could tap her earpiece, Vargas spoke again, turning to Morales. "Time is short. Transfer the data to our secure network now. Then we leave for the rendezvous with our investors." Valdez checked his watch. "I'll keep the military subdued in the meantime. No one will move against us without my say-so." Morgan realized that if they didn't act immediately, The stolen intelligence would be uploaded to a secure server beyond their reach. She motioned for Isabella to ready her weapon. Their objective was clear: disrupt the data transfer and capture these men, preferably alive. Though Morgan doubted Vargas would surrender, they had to strike hard and fast. Morgan keyed her comm. "Michael, do you read?" A burst of static. Then Michael's voice whispered in her ear, "I'm in position. Luis and I have neutralized the watchtowers. Minimal resistance outside. We see a cluster of vehicles near a helipad, possibly their escape route." "Good," Morgan replied. "We've located Vargas, Morales, and Valdez in the southern command room. We'll initiate an assault on my mark." Pausing to gather herself, Morgan signaled Isabella. They advanced down the corridor leading to the command room, weapons raised as they passed the final corner. A guard spotted them and shouted. Gunfire erupted, forcing Morgan and Isabella to dive behind a steel cabinet. A hail of bullets clanged off metal surfaces, ricocheting in sharp winds. Valdez barked an order and more guards poured into the hallway. Suddenly, the compound's lights flickered. Michael must have sabotaged the backup generator. The corridor plunged into gloom, lit only by emergency lamps. Morgan switched to her night vision goggles, a swirl of green revealing silhouettes of armed men scrambling. She fired in controlled bursts, dropping 2 of them. Isabella took out another guard who tried to flank them. Inside the command room, a furious Vargas shouted, "Secure the data, Morales. Finish the upload." The ring of monitors glowed with the progress bar of a massive file transfer. If that bar completed, everything from nuclear codes to intelligence operative lists would be at La Sombra Negra's disposal. Morgan gritted her teeth and lobbed a flashbang into the room. A deafening burst of light and sound disoriented the defenders. She and Isabella surged forward. Through the strobing after effects, Morgan spotted Morales hunched over a terminal, still transferring the stolen data. She pulled the trigger, but a guard stepped in her line of fire, taking the bullet with a scream. A figure lunged at Morgan. Hector Valdez, brandishing a compact submachine gun. Startled, Morgan sidestepped, slamming the butt of her rifle into his ribs. He stumbled, firing wildly, bullets ripping through a computer console. Sparks showered the room. In the flicker of emergency lights, Morgan ducked behind a large server tower. She popped out, sending 2 rounds into Valdez's shoulder. The corrupt official howled, collapsing behind an overturned desk. Meanwhile, Isabella engaged 2 more guards, dispatching them with precise headshots. The muzzle flashes illuminated her determined face. Stepping over the sprawled bodies, she advanced toward Morales, who clung to his briefcase. Eyes wild, he whirled around, raising a pistol, but Isabella kicked it from his hand. They grappled, exchanging fierce blows. Morales clawed at Isabella's hair, attempting to retrieve his pistol from the floor. She smashed an elbow into his jaw, sending him reeling. Morgan heard a familiar voice bellowing orders. Miguel Vargas. He had taken cover near the server rack. "Hold them off," he shouted to the remaining mercenaries. "We're almost done," Morgan realized. The upload bar had nearly reached 100%. If she didn't stop it now, La Sombra Negra's data would be duplicated on an undisclosed network. Swallowing her fear, Morgan sprinted toward the terminal. A mercenary stepped into her path. She fired point blank, the muzzle flash momentarily blinding her. He dropped, leaving the way clear. Morgan lunged at the console, ignoring the bullets whizzing past her. With a desperate breath, she slammed the butt of her rifle into the computer tower, ripping out cables. Sparks flew, and the monitor flickered with a dying glow. The progress bar froze at 98%. Morgan exhaled in relief, half expecting an immediate meltdown. The data transfer aborted, leaving only a partial upload. She had bought them precious time. Just then, Salvador Morales recovered from Isabella's strike, snatched his pistol and fired at Morgan. She dove aside, feeling the round graze her arm. She tumbled behind a stack of equipment, her shoulders screaming in protest from the earlier wound. Morales advanced, a crazed glint in his eyes, determined to finish her. But Michael's voice came over the comm. "Urgent, I'm at the door behind Morales," he said. "Get down." Morgan dropped flat, pressing herself to the floor. A single suppressed shot rang out. Morales jerked,
then crumpled, a neat bullet hole above his collarbone. Clutching the steel briefcase, he tried to speak, but only a choked rattle emerged. In seconds, he lay still, the stolen data locked away in the final place it would ever reside. Nearby, Hector Valdez groaned, trying to crawl away from the firefight. Isabella pounced, knocking the weapon from his hand and pressing her knee into his back. "Hector Valdez," she hissed in Spanish. "You're done." Morgan turned her attention to Miguel Vargas, who now realized the data upload had failed. The tall man's eyes blazed with fury. He raised an automatic pistol, but Morgan leveled her rifle. "Drop it." For a moment, Vargas seemed poised to fight. Then, with a bitter laugh, he tossed the gun to the ground. "You have no idea what forces you've angered," he sneered. "This isn't over. La Sombra Negra is bigger than me, bigger than you, bigger than any country." Morgan exhaled, her rifle steady. "We'll manage," she said quietly. "Hands behind your head." Miguel Vargas complied, albeit with a smirk that implied he considered this a mere setback. The immediate threat was contained. Morales lay dead, Valdez incapacitated, and Vargas in custody. The stolen data remained incomplete. Isabella kicked Vargas's pistol away, cuffing his wrists. Outside, Michael and Luis Ortega secured the perimeter, ensuring no reinforcements would slip in unannounced. Thus ended the reign of La Sombra Negra. In this stronghold, Morgan felt her knees buckle slightly, adrenaline seeping away. She forced herself to remain upright, ignoring the pain in her arm. A short, sharp exhalation signaled a tentative calm. They had succeeded, at great cost, perhaps, but the crisis had been averted. Within days of Miguel Vargas's capture and Hector Valdez's arrest, the global reverberations of La Sombra Negra's downfall began. Isabella Martinez, cooperating with international intelligence services, released damning documents recovered from Bodega Roja and the final compound. When the news broke, shockwaves rippled through governmental corridors worldwide. At first, some officials tried to downplay the revelations, dismissing them as rumors or exaggerations. Financial ledgers tying La Sombra Negra to high-ranking politicians, email chains discussing arms shipments and targeted assassinations, audio recordings implicating generals and corporate magnates alike. Seemingly overnight, entire power structures trembled. In the United States, congressional committees held emergency hearings, demanding accountability for how top-secret intelligence had been stolen in the first place. In Mexico, public outrage erupted. Citizens marched in the streets, demanding a complete overhaul of security agencies once riddled with Valdez's loyalists. Scores of crooked officers found themselves either resigning or facing prosecution. Across Europe, multiple intelligence agencies launched internal investigations, uncovering infiltration by La Sombra Negra collaborators they never suspected. David Hawkins, working in tandem with other whistleblowers, ensured that La Sombra Negra's assets were frozen, shutting down money laundering pipelines that had operated in the shadows for decades. Nations unwilling to cooperate found themselves politically isolated. The pressure became too great for anyone to ignore. For the average citizen, news anchors breathlessly reported on the dismantling of a worldwide crime syndicate so secretive many had scoffed at its existence. Yet for the agents and officers who had quietly fought La Sombra Negra for years, it was vindication and a chance to root out corruption that had long stifled legitimate justice. Still, pockets of resistance remained. Numerous minor cells of La Sombra Negra scattered, going to ground rather than surrender. But the heart of the organization had been ripped out with Vargas's capture, Morales's death, and Valdez's downfall. As days turned into weeks, more arrests followed in a relentless domino effect. The darkness had not disappeared entirely, but a bright light now shone upon its deepest corners, forcing it to retreat. When the dust settled, Morgan and Michael found themselves back at the only place that ever felt like home, Rancho del Sur. The journey from Mexico was fraught with tension, but Isabella and trustworthy officials helped expedite their crossing. Once stateside, the couple made no delay heading for their ranch. Pulling up the long dirt driveway, they noted how the desert grasses had grown in their absence, how the familiar silhouette of the stable stood peacefully against the sky. Even the motion sensor cameras seemed to greet them like old friends. Morgan parked near the porch, and for a moment they simply sat in silence, taking in the comforting hush of the desert twilight. Their bodies carried fresh bruises and lingering soreness, testaments to the battles they had fought. Morgan's arm remained bandaged, a nagging ache that reminded her of the final showdown with Morales. But these pains were overshadowed by a sense of relief, a burden lifted from their shoulders, now that La Sombra Negra no longer posed a direct threat. Inside the ranch house, everything looked much the same as they had left it. Morgan flicked on a lamp, revealing the warm glow that made this place a sanctuary from the storm of violence they often found themselves in. She and Michael moved around the house, performing mundane tasks, checking the water, verifying the security logs, as if reacquainting themselves with a normal life. That evening, they welcomed Isabella Martinez, who arrived with a modest update. Though she officially remained in Mexico, assigned to trace the last remnants of La Sombra Negra, she made a brief trip across the border to discuss final details with Morgan. Over a quiet meal, they shared subdued conversation about the future, about how Hector Valdez faced trial, how Miguel Vargas would be extradited, how David Hawkins continued to coordinate multi-agency investigations. In the middle of it all, Morgan felt a gentle satisfaction. The intangible threat that once loomed over her ranch had been dispelled. They had proven that even the most elusive, well-connected criminal enterprise could be brought to its knees with enough determination and collaboration. Yet neither Morgan nor Michael believed for a second that the world would stay peaceful. They had seen too much darkness to harbor illusions. Late that night, after Isabella departed and Michael had turned in, Morgan stepped onto the porch beneath a sky awash with stars. The cool desert air caressed her skin, carrying the distant trill of coyotes. She stood there, watching the faint outlines of distant hills, recalling the countless times she had kept vigil for enemies creeping along the fence line. Now no suspicious silhouettes haunted the horizon. Yet in her gut, Morgan sensed this was merely a lull, not an end. Corruption might be battered, but it was never defeated for good. Sooner or later, new threats would arise. Other cartels, other clandestine networks seeking to exploit the vulnerable. A decade of special operations had taught her that vigilance was the price of freedom. She let her gaze drift southward, to the borderlands where they had waged their latest war against La Sombra Negra. In the silver moonlight, she imagined the shadows of the desert shifting, a metaphor for the ever-present possibility of evil. In that moment, Morgan Steele squared her shoulders, recalling the oath she had once taken to defend, to protect and to stand firm against any force that sought to sow chaos. If the shadows dared to resurface, she would hunt them once more. Morgan whispered into the darkness, "I'm ready," and turned to step back into the ranch house. The desert night swallowed her words, but the sentiment lingered like a promise to herself and to the world she had fought so hard to shield. Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out, hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us. The sky was streaked with ash and firelight as Beck stood at the edge of the porch, rifle lowered. Leona stepped beside him, her hands still trembling from the last confrontation. But in her eyes there was steel. Their past hadn't just caught up, it had bowed to them. This land wasn't just home, it was legacy, blood-earned and battle-sealed. And as the final embers drifted into the night, they knew one thing with certainty: no enemy could ever erase what they had built, or who they had become together.